I had spent months planning that engagement party, not because I wanted to show off, but because it was a celebration of everything Ethan and I had been through, of the life we were supposed to share. I had rented the space, a restored Victorian mansion that I had poured my soul into, transforming it from a crumbling relic into something breathtaking, something people would remember. The chandeliers, the marble floors, the hand painted walls. Everything had my fingerprints, my vision, my name literally on the deed. It was more than a venue, it was a monument to who I was, to the life I had fought for, and I thought it would be the perfect backdrop for love. Then Lila walked in, laughing like she owned the room, and in that moment, maybe she did. My sister, the one who had always thrived on other people's attention, who had perfected the art of charm and manipulation while I spent my life building things that mattered. I had always loved her, really, I had. But love had limits, especially when it was met with envy so deep it poisoned every gesture of affection. I should have known the warning signs, the sideways glances, the whispered jabs, the little ways she undermined me when I wasn't looking. But love makes you blind, and so I didn't see her waiting, calculating, for the perfect moment to steal everything from me. Ethan had been my world. I would have followed him to the ends of the earth, believed every word he said, trusted him with my heart in ways I hadn't trusted anyone else. I thought we shared a bond that was unbreakable, and yet, as he stepped forward with the ring, smiling at her instead of me, I felt that bond shatter like glass. The room froze. My friends, my family, the caterers, the band, all of them were watching this scene unfold, eyes wide, jaws slack. My stomach twisted, my chest tightened, and for a heartbeat I thought I would scream, collapse, or disappear entirely. Then I noticed the smallest detail, the glimmer of the chandelier above, the way it reflected off the diamonds in my hands, the ring I had been planning to give him. I realized in that heartbeat of horror that everything in this room bore my name. Everything. The walls, the floors, the expensive art, the very ground beneath their feet. And I smiled. Not because I was happy, not because the betrayal didn't hurt. It hurt more than anything I could have imagined, but because the power in that moment was mine. They thought they were declaring a victory, but they had stepped into my arena, and arenas are built by those who hold the deeds. I stayed standing, poised, letting the laughter and gasps wash over me like waves, letting my eyes meet Lila's briefly. There was triumph in her smile, a smugness that wanted me to crumble, but I didn't. I let the champagne flutes clink, the soft murmur of my guests fill the silence between their surprise and my quiet, unshaken presence. Inside, my heart was a storm of grief and rage, but outside I was calm, an island in the middle of a storm. The truth was, I had always been stronger than they knew, and the revelation of that strength came not in confrontation but in patience, in letting them expose themselves fully before I decided how to respond. The shock of that night didn't end with the proposal. It lingered, hanging over me like a cloud, bleeding into every interaction I had with my sister, with Ethan, with anyone who had been present. I spent sleepless nights replaying every moment, analyzing every laugh, every touch, every look. How could I have been so blind? How could I have devoted years to someone who could betray me so effortlessly? And yet, amidst the pain, there was clarity, a cold, cutting awareness that no one who disrespected me would ever escape consequence again. I realized that revenge wasn't about immediate gratification. It wasn't about yelling, storming out, or shaming them in front of others. True revenge, the kind that lingers, the kind that settles deep into the bones of a story, required strategy, patience, and a long memory. I started with small things, gentle reminders of ownership, subtle references to contracts, polite but pointed clarifications whenever someone mentioned the venue or my generosity. Friends who had been quietly loyal to me nodded knowingly, while those who had cheered for Ethan and Lila's betrayal now found themselves confronted with a reality they hadn't considered. Everything here was mine. The air in the mansion seemed to hum with it, the quiet authority of someone who understood not just loss, but how to convert it into leverage. I began to see my humiliation not as a wound to be healed immediately, but as a tool, a lens through which I could reveal the truth of people's characters, mine included. I remember walking through the empty halls the next day, sunlight streaming through the grand windows, dust motes dancing in the golden rays. It was my kingdom, my empire, my world, and I had allowed them to momentarily think otherwise. But now I understood the power of presence, the quiet authority of someone who knows exactly what they own. They had shown their true colors, And in doing so, they had handed me the blueprint for what came next. Every betrayal, every lie, every whispered confidence Lila had stolen, every promise Ethan had broken, they were no longer just wounds. They were weapons I could use, and I would use them. The days that followed the engagement party were a strange kind of purgatory. Everyone treated me differently, some with sympathy, some with awkward avoidance, and others with a quiet, smug satisfaction that only fueled my awareness of the intricate web I was now a part of. Lila didn't call or text me to apologize. Not that I expected her to. In her mind, she had won. Ethan, on the other hand, tried to reach out, fumbling over words that were too weak to undo what he had done. He wanted to explain, to justify, to apologize, but I wasn't a person who could be swayed by empty words anymore. Not after the night he dropped to one knee before my sister, before everyone I loved. I told him nothing. I let him drown in his own guilt, while I walked through my days with a calm that was almost frightening, even to myself. I started going through the legal documents for the venue, revisiting every clause, every restriction, every loophole. I wanted to make sure that my ownership was absolute, unassailable. It wasn't just about money or property, it was about control, about reclaiming the narrative that had been stolen from me. I had spent years building that place from the ground up, and now it became a symbol of something more than architectural achievement. It was the stage upon which I would orchestrate my quiet, inevitable revenge. Each signature, each line of fine print, reminded me that while hearts could be broken, contracts did not lie. Contracts did not cheat. Contracts did not betray. Then came the whispers from friends and acquaintances, small, almost imperceptible at first, about Ethan and Lila. Their smiles were a little too forced, their laughter a little too hollow, their confidence a little too brittle. It wasn't long before I discovered the truth they had been hiding. Ethan had debts, bad ones, ones that Lila knew about and used to manipulate him. The engagement had been a calculated move from both of them, a desperate attempt to secure social validation, a sense of control over me, over my life. They thought they were clever, that their little plot would go unnoticed, but every secret has a way of surfacing, and I was finally paying attention. I began piecing it together, gathering documents, financial records, and subtle confirmations from mutual friends who had been too loyal to speak at the party. The more I learned, the more a chilling sense of inevitability washed over me. I was angry, yes, but anger had transformed into something sharper, focus. I wasn't going to explode in some moment of public rage. I wasn't going to confront them in a dramatic scene of tears and accusations. That would have satisfied their desire to see me broken. No, I would wait, and I would act in a way that left no room for ambiguity. The day would come when every lie, every deceit, every hidden agenda would be laid bare, and I would be the one standing tall while they crumbled. I started by making subtle moves around the venue itself. A friend mentioned needing space for a charity gala, and I offered it on the condition that they credit the venue properly, something Lila would never have thought of. Another time, a magazine wanted to feature the mansion, and I made sure my name was prominently displayed in the credits. The smallest victories mattered because they reinforced a truth that no one could ignore. This world, this space, was mine. I was not invisible. I was not powerless. I was the quiet storm-gathering force, the one who had built the walls, laid the floors, hung the chandeliers, and now controlled the stage. Meanwhile, Lila's and Ethan's facade began to crack. Their engagement wasn't as perfect as they wanted the world to believe. Friends started noticing inconsistencies, rumors began to circulate, and subtle cracks appeared in the image they had crafted so carefully. And with every little revelation, I felt a strange, almost vindictive satisfaction. Not the gloating satisfaction of a petty person, but the deep, steady assurance of someone who had been wronged and was now finally being heard. My strategy was simple. I would let them implode under the weight of their own deception. I would not intervene. I would not chase them. I would simply let time and truth do the work. It was during one of these quiet, reflective nights that I realized something profound. Revenge wasn't about destruction. It was about reclamation. It was about taking back the dignity, the space, the life that had been threatened, and showing, quietly but undeniably, that betrayal could never erase who you were or what you had built. My grief had been my fuel, my anger my map, and my patience the tool that turned raw emotion into strategy. I wasn't just surviving this betrayal, I was transforming it into power, into agency, into the ability to write the next chapter of my life exactly as I wanted. I also began to notice subtle changes within myself. I was no longer the naive, trusting girl who had believed in love without question. I was more careful, yes, but also more awake, more alive, more conscious of the currents of human behavior that often go unnoticed until they crash into you. My relationships shifted, some deepened, some ended, some revealed true colors I hadn't seen before. And I realized that this story, the story of being betrayed by the person you love and the sibling you trusted, wasn't just about pain. It was about awakening, about learning to protect your own light in a world full of shadows. As I walked through the mansion one night, alone, the chandeliers casting delicate shadows on the polished floors, I felt a strange sense of calm. The rage had softened into clarity, the grief into resolve. I was ready for the next move, whatever it would be. I knew the world was watching. Even if they didn't realize it yet, they didn't know that the quietest person in the room is often the one who controls the storm. And I finally understood that completely. Weeks turned into months, and the truth began to surface in ways I had almost predicted but still found deliciously satisfying. Ethan had never been honest about the extent of his debts, and Lila had played the perfect accomplice, masking greed as love. Friends and acquaintances started noticing oddities, late night calls, unreturned favors, whispered phone conversations. It wasn't my place to spread rumors. I let the universe handle it. Slowly, quietly, the cracks in their facade widened. I didn't have to confront them directly. Their own choices were unraveling the story they had tried to sell the world. Watching it happen was both surreal and intoxicating, a quiet vindication that no shouting could ever provide. Then came the moment that truly set everything into motion. I had received an unexpected call from one of Ethan's creditors, a polite but firm inquiry about the engagement ring he had purchased in my name. That little sparkle, which had represented love and devotion in my hands, now became the trigger for a financial reckoning neither of them could avoid. The irony wasn't lost on me. He had humiliated me at my own party, but the consequence of his recklessness would land squarely in the world he had tried to build with my sister. I didn't interfere. I simply confirmed that the property, the contracts, and the documentation all bore my name, my authority, my claim. The law was on my side, and the universe, it seemed, had its own agenda. I started attending social gatherings again, but differently. I walked in with an air that was impossible to ignore, a presence that radiated both calm and strength. People noticed it, the ones who had witnessed the engagement party, who had gasped in surprise at Ethan's betrayal, who had whispered behind closed doors. They looked at me with a new lens, a lens that recognized resilience, intelligence, and the quiet power of someone who had been wronged and refused to crumble. Friends began to approach me, offering subtle acknowledgments and sharing their own stories of betrayal, as if sensing a kindred spirit. It was strange how grief and rage could transform into authority, but I was learning fast. And then, of course, there was Lila. I didn't seek her out, she found me in her own way. A phone call, a text, a feigned casual meeting at a mutual friends gathering. She tried to laugh it off, to act as if nothing had happened, as if the engagement party had been nothing more than a small hiccup in the course of her perfect life. But her eyes betrayed her, darting toward the chandeliers, toward the walls, toward the polished floors she hadn't built but now walked upon as if she owned them. Every subtle gesture, every falter in her voice, reminded me that she had underestimated me, that she had never considered that I might have patience, foresight, and the cold ability to let the world do what anger alone could not. It all came to a head one chilly autumn evening when I hosted a small gala at the mansion. The event was ostensibly for charity, but I had invited select friends and associates, knowing full well that Ethan and Lila would be curious enough to attend. They arrived, of course, with perfect smiles and carefully rehearsed casual conversation, underestimating the room entirely. From the moment they stepped inside, the subtle but undeniable truth of ownership was everywhere. The invitations bore my name. The plaques on the walls bore my name. The contracts they had overlooked bore my name. I watched them navigate the space, their confidence quietly eroding as they realized, finally, that they were intruders in a domain that did not belong to them. By the time dinner was served, the unraveling was complete. Whispers had begun to circulate about Ethan's financial instability, Lila's manipulations, and the true story behind the engagement party that everyone had witnessed but had not fully understood. Friends who had once been silent witnesses now spoke discreetly to me, confirming suspicions, sharing rumors, and providing subtle documentation that I had never asked for but had anticipated. The tension in the room was electric, a blend of discomfort and awe, and through it all, I remained composed, sipping my champagne, watching the storm of their own making crash quietly around them. It wasn't maliciousness that drove me, it was clarity. I understood now that the betrayal I had endured was not a reflection of my worth, but of theirs. Ethan's lies, Lila's envy, the cruel timing of the engagement party, all of it revealed the limits of their character. My response, measured and deliberate, revealed mine. There was a strange kind of beauty in watching deception collapse under its own weight, a poetic justice that no public confrontation could match. In that room, I realized that revenge isn't always loud. Sometimes it is the quiet, inevitable revelation that speaks the loudest. And when the night ended, and the guests had gone, and the mansion was bathed in the soft glow of moonlight streaming through the windows, I finally allowed myself a moment of reflection. I wasn't unscathed. The memory of Ethan's betrayal, the sting of my sister's greed, the humiliation of that fateful engagement party, they all lingered. But they no longer held power over me. I had reclaimed my narrative, my space, my dignity. And for the first time in months, I felt a calm that was deeper than satisfaction, deeper than victory. It was the kind of peace that comes from knowing you have survived, adapted, and emerged stronger. In the quiet aftermath, I realized that the journey wasn't just about revenge. It was about understanding the fragile lines between love and loyalty, ambition and greed, trust and manipulation. It was about learning that humiliation, while sharp and immediate, could be transformed into wisdom, strategy, and resilience. And it was about remembering, above all, that the most dangerous person in any room is the one who knows their own power and refuses to let betrayal define them. The next chapter of my life unfolded quietly, almost invisibly to the casual observer, but with a momentum that was impossible to stop. I poured myself into the mansion, into the business that had grown alongside it, and into myself. Every room I walked through was a reminder that I had built something lasting, something real, something that no act of betrayal could ever erase. Lila and Ethan tried to maintain appearances, but their engagements and schemes began to unravel in ways they hadn't predicted. Friends distanced themselves from their drama, social invitations became scarce, and the carefully constructed veneer of perfection they had relied upon started to crumble. And I watched it happen without a word, letting patience and strategy replace the raw emotions that had once threatened to consume me. Then came the moment I had been waiting for, a legal confrontation neither of them anticipated. Ethan had defaulted on multiple financial obligations, and Lila had used her connection to him to quietly attach herself to assets she had no right to claim. I approached the situation not with rage, but with meticulous planning. I had already gathered every document, every contract, every piece of evidence I could find, and I worked with lawyers who understood both the legal and emotional stakes. The court hearings were tense, emotionally draining, and every moment was a reminder of the betrayal I had endured. But through it all, I remained composed, articulate, and unwavering. Every accusation they threw my way was countered with facts, with proof, with an undeniable display of truth. During the hearings, I noticed subtle shifts in Lila's demeanor. The arrogance, the smugness, the unshakable confidence, they began to erode with every statement I made. Her eyes, once glimmering with triumph, now darted nervously, her carefully rehearsed words faltering under scrutiny. Ethan, who had once seemed untouchable in his charm, grew pale, stammering, and clearly unprepared for the consequences of his actions. It was almost surreal to watch them unravel, not in a dramatic spectacle of yelling or confrontation, but in the quiet, unyielding assertion of truth and ownership. I realized then that real power doesn't require theatrics. It requires patience, intelligence, and the courage to stand firm when the world is trying to knock you down. And yet, even as I won, even as the court ruled in my favor and Lila and Ethan were left with the tangible consequences of their deceit, I felt a strange emptiness. Victory had a hollow echo if it wasn't accompanied by self-discovery and healing. I allowed myself to grieve, not for the humiliation they caused, not for the loss of trust, but for the years of misplaced devotion, the innocence I had lost, and the sister I had once loved who had chosen envy over family. It was a mourning of what could have been, tempered by the knowledge that I had survived, adapted, and reclaimed my life. After the legal matters were resolved, I threw myself back into the mansion and my work, but differently this time. I hosted events not for status, not for appearances, but to build genuine community, to create spaces where honesty, effort, and passion were celebrated. I mentored young entrepreneurs, encouraged artists, and helped friends pursue their own dreams. The mansion, once a backdrop for betrayal, became a symbol of resilience, a tangible reminder that even when life breaks you down, you can rebuild stronger, wiser, and more aware. Lila and Ethan faded into the background of my life. They were no longer threats, no longer figures of humiliation. They became cautionary tales, reminders of how fragile appearances are when divorced from integrity. I rarely spoke of them, except to reflect quietly, to draw lessons from what had happened. Their betrayal had shaped me, sharpened me, and forced me to confront truths about human nature, trust, and self-worth. And in that confrontation, I discovered an inner strength I hadn't known existed, a power born not from anger or vengeance, but from clarity, patience, and the courage to reclaim what was always mine. The final moment of catharsis came unexpectedly during a quiet evening alone in the mansion. I stood by the grand windows, the city lights twinkling beyond the glass, and allowed myself to feel the full spectrum of what I had endured: pain, anger, grief, disappointment, and ultimately triumph. I understood then that life doesn't always offer the closure we crave, but it does offer the chance to redefine ourselves, to assert our agency, and to let truth and justice unfold in their own time. I realized that I was no longer the woman who had been humiliated, the one who had trusted blindly, the one who had allowed betrayal to define her. I was stronger, wiser, and fully aware of the power I carried, the power of resilience, integrity, and self-possession. And so I share this story with you not to revel in vengeance, but to offer a lesson. Betrayal hurts, humiliation stings, and those we trust the most can sometimes be our greatest teachers. But the measure of a person is not in the cruelty they endure, but in how they rise from it, how they reclaim their narrative, and how they turn pain into wisdom. If this story resonates with you, I hope you'll take a moment to like, share, and subscribe, and leave a comment about your own experiences with betrayal and resilience. There's power in sharing, in connecting, and in knowing you are not alone in reclaiming your life.